of Marketing at the Indian School of Business. Prior joining to ISB, he worked as an assistant professor at Iowa State University of Science and Technology. Professor currently focuses on two streams of research, sales, force management, and marketing finance interface. His first dissertation essay won the Best Dissertation Award from the Sales SIG. His second dissertation essay is the article in the 2019 January edition of the Journal of Marketing, a premier journal in marketing. He received his PhD in marketing from the University of Houston, MBA from XLRI Jamshedpur, and MS in quantitative economics from Indian Statistical Institute. Prior to his PhD, he worked in analytics and retail industries for 4 years. I welcome you again to this session, sir. And now the podium is all yours. Please enlighten us with all the great information that we can get. Thank you.
No, thank you for the great introduction. Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. So my name is Raghuram. So I work at ISB and I'm based out of the Mohali campus. So today I would like to talk about crossing the chasm. Okay? So what does chasm in English, plain English means? It's basically divide. Okay, so I'll talk about what's the divide I'm talking about. So before I get into that, let's briefly talk about what is called as the product life cycle. Okay, so when you're launching any new product, especially a new category of the product, right? So something which didn't exist, you're launching, let's say in 2010, you're launching a smartphone. So you're creating a new category. So then the typical adoption process is described by this product life cycle, right? So however good the product might be, so you don't see everybody adopting it on the first day. So there is an adoption pattern. So there are few people who adopt it very early. So they have the means to it, and not just that. So they also are more risk taking. So they're willing to actually try out new products and they enjoy actually dealing with new products. So whatever it is, technology products, non-tech products. So even as simple as think about like opening a new kind of a restaurant, right? So there are few people who are actually eager to go there and try out the new cuisine. And there are little bit of a laggards in that sense. So not everybody is going to go and try the new cuisine, right? So in the same fashion, you can think of any new product. So your launch, let it be electrical cars or online shopping, online grocery delivery. So all of these products you can think of, there is an adoption pattern and not everybody adopts on the day one, right? So typically you'll see the so-called innovators. So they tend to adopt first and they really like the idea of new technology or new products, and then followed by early adopters. So they kind of are similar. So I'll describe the difference between them. But the majority of the market actually comes from the early majority and late majority. Okay, so around 68% of the market comes from these segments. And finally, you have few laggards, so who may not have the means to adopt the product. So even in India, you can think of some people still cannot afford to own a smartphone, or some people who choose not to actually own a smartphone, right? So those fall in the bucket of laggards. So this has been a classical product life cycle, or in other words, so this is what, when you're launching a new product, this is what you hope will happen, isn't it? So when you're an entrepreneur and you are launching a new idea, you're hoping initially only a few people adopt, but slowly and gradually this becomes a mainstream product. So unfortunately, that's not necessarily true. Okay. So this is a famous kind of a research or a book by a person named Jeffrey Moore. So what he basically argues is that there is a chasm or the divide between the early adopters and early majority. Okay. So we talked about 5 different segments broadly. So you have the innovators, early adopters, and then you have the mainstream market consisting of early majority, late majority, and laggards. And there seems to be a huge divide between these early adopters and the early majority. So successful companies, or the companies which became mainstream, are the ones who are able to cross this chasm. If for whatever reason, if your idea is not able to cross this chasm, then you remain probably a niche player. You might have like a 2 to 3% market share, and that's where the story ends, right? So if you also notice, so there is a small divide between each of the segments, right? So between innovators and early adopters, there is a small gap. Again, between early majority and late majority, there is a small gap, but the huge divide exists between these early adopters and early majority. Okay. So this model has been developed more recently updated in the context of technology. So that's why you see a different nomenclature here. So instead of innovators, so we can call them as tech enthusiasts. So these are the people who adopt the product just for the sake of new technology. And then you have the visionaries. So visionaries are slightly different from tech enthusiasts. So they like technology, but they're able to actually make good use of the technology either in the personal life or in their professional life. Okay, so they can make a business case for a new technology. So those are early adopters or visionaries. And then comes the pragmatists, so who are very practical oriented and they are not willing to try out something just for the sake of trying it out, and they need a proper business case or why this product will work, and they are not really willing to tolerate any glitches. So pragmatists are fundamentally very different from visionaries, okay, and similarly conservatives and skeptics. But we will try to focus on the difference between the visionaries and pragmatists. Okay? So suppose you're running a firm, but so how do I know when I am in the chasm, right? So when am I facing this issue of this? So this is a little peculiar in the sense, so if you talk to your existing customers, okay, so you will get a very good response, but at the same time, you are not able to grow your market, right? Because the innovators and the early adopters have adopted your product and they're happy with you. It's not that they are not happy with you. They're satisfied, they're able to actually do whatever they want to do with the product, but you're not finding new customers. Okay, so the acquisition becomes an issue, or you're not able to grow your market after an initial growth in the market, right? So that is when you probably can think about, okay, so there seems to be some issue, right? It's kind of a dilemma that you might be facing. Why are my current customers happy, but at the same time, I'm not able to acquire new customers? So that's when it's a signal that you probably are in this chasm, right? So few examples of like current products that we can think of are, for example, electrical cars. So there is a decent market for electrical cars, maybe around 5% of the market might be adopting it, but not everybody, right? So all of us might be following a wait and watch approach. So we want the system to be completely set up. There are no glitches, and that's when we want to adopt. But from a company's perspective, only when more people adopt, it makes sense for them to actually invest in infrastructure. So that's kind of a chicken and egg problem. So let me actually talk about an example of a company which lost actually more than $1 billion in this. Okay? So Motorola came up with a mobile phone firm called Iridium. So this I'm talking about it somewhere in 2000s. Okay, so this is before the era of smartphones, somewhere around 2005. So you can think of before Apple iPhone came into picture. So their idea is brilliant. So their idea is that why do we need to have so many cellular towers? So instead, we can have these low orbit satellites and you only require 66 of them. Okay. So with only 66 low orbit satellites, you can cover the entire Earth. Okay. So that's a brilliant idea, isn't it? So from a both from a technology and a scientific point of view, and also in terms of dealing with setting up these cellular towers and maintaining them on a regular basis, it's a mess. So given that it's a brilliant idea, but probably none of us have never heard about this and it never became mainstream. So there are a few reasons for that. So let's look at some of the reasons. So the one is the handset is bulky and the high cost of subscription. So those two are understandable. So when you're launching a new product, so maybe the cost of subscription will be initially very high, and maybe the handset is not the most user friendly, right? But the main problem that they faced is it actually worked poorly inside the building. So that's a deal breaker, isn't it? So you're using a cell phone and it doesn't work inside your own house. So why the hell will I buy it? So that seems to be a put brakes on their brilliant idea, brilliant scientific idea at least. So they did launch the product. So they actually launched all the satellites. It still works, but it is only available or used by military or people who go for treks. Like, so when you're going for a trek and you don't have anybody nearby, so you might use a satellite phone so that you can contact the rescue team in case you need one, right? So that's an example of a company which kind of has fallen into this chasm and never able to recover. So let's look at why firms fall in this chasm. Okay, so before that, let's understand the psychographics, which is some of the psychological element plus the demographics of these different segments. So when you look at the tech enthusiasts, so they appreciate technology for its own sake. Okay, and then they really like disruptive changes, and that excites them. They're also competent to evaluate, and they're willing to tolerate initial glitches and so on. So they generally are very well, so the worst with technology, and they can handle the glitches. But the downside is that they are not a big market. Maybe 2 to 3% of the market is where you see these tech enthusiasts. And then comes the visionaries market. So how are the visionaries different from tech enthusiasts? So even they are good at technology, but they can actually match new technologies to business opportunity. So it's not just that they buy a product just for a technology sake, but they're able to actually map it to some business opportunity. And they want to be seen as leaders in their own industry. So they are looking for some breakthrough innovations, or not some small improvements over the existing products. Okay. And the interesting aspect is that they're very easy to sell. So if you have a very good idea, so you can sell it to visionaries, but they're very hard to please. Okay. So after the sale happens, you will generally find that they're very hard to please, and which poses its own challenges. So they typically want a highly customized product. So let's look at the next segment, which is the pragmatists. So the pragmatists consist of majority of market volume, around like 1 in 3 customers, you can say, fall in this bucket. And the major difference is they are not comfortable with breakthrough innovations, right? So something drastically different from what already exists. So that is something they are not very comfortable. So what they are looking for more is like incremental, some maybe basic improvements from what currently exists in the marketplace. So another dimension is that they want proven products and standard solutions, and they are hardest to sell. Okay? So I hope you're able to see the differences between these segments, especially between visionaries and pragmatists. Okay. And also one more thing is they would like references. Like if you go to sell to them, they're going to ask you, okay, who else in my industry is currently using this? So across the industry references or cross industry references are not very useful to them. So they are not encouraged by that, and they want references from within the same industry. Okay. So what is the issue we saw with all of this? So it leads to two major issues. So the first one is, so there is a clear difference in orientation between visionaries and pragmatists. And because of that, visionaries do not make good references for pragmatists. So think about like some of your friends might be very tech savvy, right? And all of us may not be. And a tech savvy friend might be buying something very innovative product, but we may or may not be relating to him or her, isn't it? So when that happens, so even though that person has adopted, I don't see that the product is relevant for my needs. So in that sense, the pragmatists are people who are more practical and looking for incremental innovations. They are not excited about the fact that visionaries have adopted this. Okay? So this leads to the catch-22 situation or the chicken and egg issue. So basically pragmatists are highly reference oriented, but the only reference that they have is visionaries, but they're not willing to accept it, right? So you have the visionaries have adopted your product, and now you're hoping in a natural fashion, the next segment will be adopting it, but the next segment wants references only from within the segment. So they're not willing to, or they're not very comfortable accepting or understanding the pragmatists. So there are, because of their psychographic differences. And so the another reason is that pragmatists also wish to buy only from market leaders. In the other sense, they won't buy from an established company and not from a small firm. So again, but you cannot become an established firm unless the pragmatists buy, right? So unless the mainstream customers start buying your product, you do not become mainstream. But the mainstream customers are generally want to buy from an established company. So that becomes the classical chicken and egg problem. So the next thing is the next probably half an hour I want to spend about like talking about how do we actually cross this chasm. Okay, so how do we overcome these challenges, and I'll also give you maybe like 3 4 examples of companies which have successfully managed to overcome this challenge, and then the last 10 15 minutes I'll be happy to answer any questions. Okay? So how do we cross this chasm? Okay, so there are a few analogies that we can use here. The first one is from the World War II. Some of you who are familiar with the history. So let's say, so this is, we're talking about the year in which the Germany was occupying most of the Europe. Okay, so including France and probably not Britain, but the Normandy coast is in France. So when the Germany was occupying this, and the US wants to basically decide whether they should spread out their forces and try to attack all the points where Germany is currently basically holding the post, or should they choose a point of attack and attack with an immense force, right? Such that there is no chance that they will lose. The US, basically the allied forces, they can set up their base there, and once to set up their base there, they can move forward from there. Okay. So they have chosen this famous beach called Normandy coast, and that's where they send enormous troops. Okay. So they basically send more than 2 lakh troops and with 5,000 ships. So given the enormity of it, so Germany obviously lost their foothold in that coastal area. And so now what happens is the allied forces can send the backup, and they have slowly made inroads. Okay. And that is how they were able to overcome Germany and won the war. So how is this related to anything to do with marketing? So the idea here is, so when you feel you are in the chasm, it is not a good idea to spread your resources in all the different segments. Okay. So there might be 10 different segments where your product might be a hit, but the resources are always limited, right? So especially when you're a small firm, you cannot spread your resources thin. So you have to choose a point of attack. So you have to understand which segment should I be targeting first. And once you target that segment, you satisfy that segment very well, such that you are the mainstream player in that segment. Okay. So once you do that, then you slowly make inroads into the other segments. Okay. So the other analogy, probably easier to understand, is the bowling pin analogy. So the first pin is kind of your beachhead segment you can think of. So when you're playing the game of bowling, so you're definitely targeting the first pin, isn't it? You're not trying to target the third or the fourth one in the row. You're targeting the first row, the first pin available there, and you're trying to hit with the maximum force possible. And with the right angle, of course, otherwise it will not go anywhere. So when you're doing that, the hope is that it is going to create a ripple effect, and by which maybe all the pins will land in the right place. So we can use a similar analogy here. So you target one segment. Okay. So don't spread your resources across all the segments, which is not going to take anywhere. So target one segment and make sure that segment, all the customers in that segment are really, really happy with you. And once you're doing that, then move to the adjacent segments. So there are a couple of alternative things you can do here, right? So the right-hand side, the curve here says you're targeting the same segment, but you're going from application 1 to application 2 to application 3. So you're finding more and more uses for your product within the same segment. Or the other way around is you are having the same use for your product, but you're finding newer segments. So you're finding newer segments, so where this product can be used, and as a result, you're expanding your market share. Okay. So now let's look at few examples here. So how did firms actually have achieved this? I guess any masterclass in marketing, or in fact any class in marketing, cannot be complete without talking about Apple, isn't it? So they're one of the pioneers of marketing. So they're a great technology company, no doubt about that, but they are no less in their marketing activities as well. Okay. So let's see how Apple iPad has been able to cross this chasm, right? So when they launched this new category, so they basically invented the idea of tablets. So how did they go about it? So when they've launched the iPad, obviously the innovators or the first segment to adopt is the Mac enthusiasts, right? So whoever is using a Mac tablet, they were more than happy to go and buy an Apple iPad, and they were advocating it. They were pretty happy with it. And interestingly, the visionaries or the next segment to adopt Apple, or the next segment that Apple has targeted, intentionally targeted, is the executives. So these are the top level people we are talking about: CEOs, CMOs, CFOs of the organizations. And they have started using this as a personal digital assistant. Okay. So previously you might have different tools, or maybe you're just doing it by hand, which is a messy thing. But now you have a nice iPad that you can use, and it is user friendly. In fact, you can make your own schedule. You're no longer dependent on your secretary to help you out, right? So they are the visionaries. So this is good. So what do you do next? So if you are Apple, so think about, given the limited resources, so where should I spend my money, right? So this tablet, now everybody is using it, but if you look back in 2000s, so even Apple has limited budget, right? So nobody has unlimited budgets. So given the limited budget, so which will be the ideal segment I should be targeting? So I'll give away the answer here. So the answer is that they have actually targeted salespeople. So this might come as a surprise to many of us. So their main target segment that they've identified is a little high-end salespeople. You can say B2B, which is business to business salespeople, or medical reps, or salespeople working in the car dealerships. So these are the salespeople who used to think about a medical rep. So if they were carrying information about a new drug, so they have to take a lot of paperwork with them. They have to show some evidence that this drug actually works, and why this is better than the previous drug or better than the competitor's drug, right? So all of that used to be very bulky. And now instead of that, they can show a lot of information in iPad, and probably using nice charts, nice colors, graphs, and so on. And even the doctors might be more receptive to it, right? So similarly, a car dealership, maybe now all the dealership even in India have some sort of a tablet. But so at that time, Apple intentionally targeted them. So they were able to actually, so they found an immediate use for them, right? So there is a need for this segment. And one more advantage is their salespeople obviously are interacting with their customers. So either retail customers or other business customers, and that's like a free advertisement for you, isn't it? So when you go to buy a car and you see this nice tablet for the first time, you might be attracted by the tablet more than actually the car that you're willing to buy. So that is the beach set segment. So they have actually made sure that most of the salespeople, so wherever there is a need, of course, are started using tablets. So that is the first segment that they have targeted. And after that, the story probably most of us know. So they have become the mainstream. So kids in the US mainly started using it for educational, then for social networking purposes, and finally the conservatives, you can say, are the grandparents, with the advent with like the Facebook and this FaceTime. So with all these features added in, so even the grandparents have started using it. So you can see that after the visionaries have adopted it, it is a tactical decision. So you have to be clever about what is the next segment that I should be targeting, so that I can actually win that segment and move to the subsequent segments. Okay, so you cannot randomly choose any set of next customers that you want to target. So, so some of you might be wondering, okay, is this only applicable in the case of technology, or is this applicable even in the case of other kind of products? Okay, so a classic case that you can think of in Indian context is Gillette. So Gillette obviously has the shaving products, and the challenge that they faced is the market stagnated around 2007. So from the time they launched, maybe in the late 90s or early 2000s, so they have seen a tremendous market growth for the first 5, 7, or 10 years. And after that, they're not able to penetrate the market. So that is clearly a case of falling in the chasm, right? So the initial segments, so in this case, it may not be so much about technology adoption, but the product adoption. When you're thinking about adopting a simple razor, right? So one element is the cost. And the second element is, do I really care about a clean shave? So if you look at the Gillette's positioning around that time, so they used to bombard with ads saying that if you're using a Gillette Mac 3, you're going to get a much more clean shave and you're going to get a shave without any cuts, right? So, but they have stagnated there. So they weren't able to penetrate, let's say, the upper middle class or the middle class segments. So they found two challenges. So the first challenge that they found is so the cost of the product, right? So they worked on that. They have spent a lot on the R&D to actually reduce the cost. So it used to be, let's say, 500 rupees, but they have brought it to 200 rupees or so. So they have started replacing all the non-essential elements. So for example, package, or maybe the handle. Instead of using a steel handle, they've started using a plastic handle in some places and things like that. So by doing all of that, they were able to reduce the cost. But even after they reduced the cost, so they found that the sales weren't increasing. Okay, so they have done some more market research, and what they found is, so the general belief is that actually having a beard is kind of a sign of a virility, or is kind of it's a cool look. Okay, so the you have to think about not just about the functional barriers. So it's not just the price or the cost or whatever you're looking at. That's not the only reason why a customer may not be buying your product. So sometimes there are a lot of psychological barriers. Okay, so one more psychological barrier that people had is, people thought shaving is a skill. Okay, so if I am skillful in my shaving, then I am not going to get any cuts, which is true to some extent, right? But if you are actually using a good razor, the chance that you get a cut is also lower. So which is what Mac 3 has realized, but they weren't. So it took a while for them to actually make the transition, because you might be showing me 100 times that you can get a clean shave, but if I don't care about a clean shave, the ad is not relevant to me. Okay, so they have done a very interesting campaign called Shaving India, so you can actually do a Google search on that. So they have created a buzz about why actually stubble look or having a beard is not cool, and they were able to slowly change the perception that clean shave is probably much more acceptable. And once people started thinking that, okay, clean shave is better, I look more professional with a clean shave, that is when I'm starting to think about which razor to buy, right? Otherwise, I'm not even getting there. So let's look at a couple of more examples and then I'll open up for questions. So VMware is a software. So some of you might have heard about it. It's basically virtualizes the computers. Okay, so on the same system, you can run multiple kind of, you can run Windows, you can run Linux, you can also do some kind of a parallel computing. So that's why it is called as virtualizing the computers. So the challenges that they found, or there are few use cases, or the first consumer segment to adopt, right? The first segment is the tech enthusiasts, or the techies who are using both Windows and Linux at the same time. Okay, so they immediately found a use for it. So previously, if I didn't have this, probably I need to have two separate systems. Now this is great. I can run both Windows and Linux on the same system. So the next segment to adopt is the people who wanted to actually run the same application on two or more servers. So you might have some heavy applications for which one server may not be sufficient. So in that case, you might need more than one server, and VMware helps in that. Okay, so they have been very successful there, but they were thinking about what next. So who will be the right segment to target after I have seen that these two segments are satisfied? Okay, so that is an important decision. So you cannot just randomly choose a segment, or you cannot try to satisfy all the segments. So remember, resources are limited. So given that, you have to be clever about what is the next segment that I want to target. So interestingly, the next segment that they have targeted is the software testing. Okay. So software testing, if you think about, so very important. So like even the way our credit cards, debit cards work. So all of these are tested, right? So when you're testing them, you need to create additional server space, because you cannot use the same server space where the existing systems are already running, and which is a painful thing. So you're investing a lot of money in buying these systems just for testing, and this testing is not done on a day-to-day basis, right? So this testing is done maybe like, let's say, once in 3 months or once in 6 months, when you've written the code and you want to test it out. So you have a lot of server space which you are buying, but which is lying vacant for most of the year. So that is the segment that they have chosen to target. So VMware has cleverly chosen that, okay, software testing is what seems to be the where we can find a good use case. And they have went there. And after that, they went to the IT ops managers who face a lot of budget issues from this, right? So what worked again for them? So the same idea. So they have focused on a niche market, and then they have used the bowling pin strategy. So they have put all their resources in one segment. They have saturated the segment, and once that segment is won, so they have moved to the adjacent segments. So we can also look at another example, which is a company called Lithium. So Lithium basically creates uh, kind of a tool where consumers can co-create. Okay, consumers so can co-create and deliver customer support content. Okay, so the idea is sounds interesting, isn't it? So the customer support is generally given by the customer support team. You call a call center and they'll tell you what to do. My laptop is not working, maybe my cell phone Wi-Fi is not working. But the idea about the customers actually co-creating or co-generating the support is, so there are a lot of people who are happy to help you for free. So if you just go nowadays and just type maybe in Quora or somewhere, okay, this is the problem that I'm facing. So there are a lot of people who are happy to help you with that. So given this, so the idea is, how can I co-create? Okay, how can I create this space so where customers come for free? Okay, so there is no charge, and helping other customers who are posing the question, right? But the challenge that the company is facing is no mainstream competition. So they don't have any mainstream competition in that sense, and which is also an issue if you think of it, right? So not having a competition, that means you're creating entirely a new segment, entirely a new product category, so which makes it much more tougher for adoption. Okay, so they were like having troubles with extended sales cycles. They were not able to close the cycles. So people were interested in them, but they weren't able to actually close the deals. So what did they do? So they have actually uh, chosen the tech support as their beachhead segment. So the beachhead segment is the major segment that they have targeted. So why tech support? So tech support, if you think about, is generally overworked and underappreciated, right? So when the tech is working, either in ISB, in office, nobody goes and congratulates them. But if something goes wrong, so they will be blamed a lot, right? So they are generally overworked, but not as appreciated as they should be. And so given that, so this idea actually resonated with them. So Lithium was able to convince the tech support team to actually adopt this idea. And they have also have worked with the firm to make it gamified. So what is gamified? So it's not just that the customers come and help each other, but I can give you some points. So depending on how many customers you are helping or the quality of your responses, I'm going to give you few points and maybe few badges like gold, silver, platinum, and so on. And I may not be giving any monetary benefit. Okay, so keep that in mind. I'm not giving any money, but there is an intrinsic motivation for people to share their knowledge or help other people. So they have leveraged on that fact, and they have created an excellent product. And it is not, they didn't stop with just giving their initial solution. In some sense, they have created a whole product idea. Okay? So what worked for them? Again, the product itself is great. Of course, the product is not a great one, then probably the story doesn't even come till the chasm, right? So maybe you are actually dying in the first segment or the second segment itself. So, but assuming your product or the idea is good, so what you have to do is different at different stages of the product life cycle. So let's actually watch this short video about a better place. So the idea of this company is that there are these electrical cars, right? And one reason most people are not willing to adopt an electrical car is the range issue. Maybe the car can come up to 250 kilometers or 300 kilometers, and that may not be sufficient for me as a consumer. If that is the case, then can we actually use swappable batteries, isn't it? So when you have this, well, let's say you just walk into a store and you give out your dead battery and you get exchanged with a new battery, and assume these stations are there everywhere in the country. So that immediately solves the problem of the range of an electrical vehicle. So let's see a short video of this.
The electric car is the future of transportation in a world free from dependence on oil. Better Place took that concept further and developed the battery switch model, the world's most innovative and convenient way to allow electric car drivers to travel long distances without having to take long breaks to recharge. The battery switch is performed in a network of battery switch stations, which are located at strategic spots, much like traditional gas stations. From the moment you enter the switch station, advanced robots are standing by with a fresh battery. The fully automated system developed by Better Place works simultaneously to switch your depleted battery with a fully charged one. You don't have to exit the car, and you are constantly updated along the process, which takes even less time than it took to fill up your car with gas. Drive, Switch and Go makes the electric car suitable for everyone. A car that can go anywhere conveniently and affordably.
We got a car that's more convenient. It goes as long as you want. It's not limited by range. It's not limited by time. It's cheap to buy. It actually keeps its value. The side effect, you save the world.
Drive, switch, go. It's as simple as that.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed watching the video. So the idea is pretty smart, right? So instead of actually putting the charging stations, so why not use a swappable battery station? So you go out, give out your old battery and get a new one. And they were also clever in choosing the right countries. I think one of them is definitely Israel. So because Israel being a small country, it is going to be easier to actually develop these battery swapping stations, and you can saturate the country pretty easily, right? So they have done that homework, but interestingly, they have actually failed. So they have recently declared bankrupt, and so the idea might resurface again. So I'm not going to explain the reason here, so why they might have failed. So I'll leave it to you. Hopefully, I have created enough interest, the video, for you to go back and look why they might have failed, and there are a few important lessons there. Okay, so I'll leave it to you to look at why they might have failed. So, and let me go to the next slide here. Okay, so what is the major takeaways from this short session? So the crossing the chasm is crucial. Okay, so the chasm is the divide between the early market and basically the mainstream market. So just because your early market you're able to do well doesn't mean that naturally everybody is going to adopt. Okay, there are a lot of examples where the products have fallen the chasm and they have never be able to recover from that. Okay, so if you think purely from a marketing perspective, so what this means is, so whatever marketing activities you have done in the initial stage, you cannot be using the same ones in the later stages of the marketing. Okay, because these segments are so fundamentally different. So the marketing strategies and tactics also have to be changing with each additional segment you're able to adopt. Okay. So think about the simple case of Gillette, right? So maybe when Gillette was launched, when they advertised that you can get a clean shave, so like the upper strata of the society, probably that is really valued by them. Maybe they didn't want to go to a barber shop and get the shave done. And they also might have seen the Gillette Mag 3, it actually works well. They might have gone abroad and they might have seen the product. So they have adopted it. But Gillette has continued the same marketing strategy for 2 or 3 years, and they weren't able to penetrate the market. Okay. So only when they changed the communication along with the product, so they were able to actually win the next segment. Okay. So keep that in mind. So whatever marketing strategies you're using in the initially, the same will most likely not work in the later stages. Okay. Because the consumers that are adopting the product are fundamentally different. So the another key takeaway from this is don't spread your resources thin. So choose your segments cleverly. So which customers I want to target. So should I target, let's say if you're selling a software product, so should I actually, obviously means you may not be able to grow in many of the segments, right? So then you are not a segment leader or a leader in any one of the industries. So that becomes an issue. And once you have chosen a segment, you allocate the right resources and you form the right partnerships and alliances and you focus on developing the whole product. Okay. So it's not just you are giving that one simple product and actually giving the whole product. So the simple example is, so when the MP3 was developed, so you still had to figure out where you go and buy the music. But when the Apple iPhone or like even for iPad was developed, so the where you can buy the music is actually nicely integrated with it, right? So that's the idea of whole product. So you should be able to give a what the customer really wants. So all the elements should be integrated into this. So from a personal point of view, if you think if I'm going to ICICI Bank now, so all my financial needs, right? So banking needs, insurance needs, my mutual funds. So all of them are taken care by one individual. So I have a relationship manager who comes to me and then I can deal with the one person, and the one person advises me on different things. So that's the idea of the whole product. So then I'm not looking for banking. I'm not going to ICICI, and maybe for insurance, I'm not then thinking about different company, and for mutual funds, I'm not thinking about different company. So it's also important to actually think about what does the customer really want from us and develop the whole product in that sense. Okay. So let me stop at this point. And if you have interested, I strongly encourage reading everybody this book. And especially if you have started a venture or if you're going to start a venture, I think this book will give you a very practical advice on how to go about marketing. And this is my email ID. I'll be happy to be in touch. So please send me any questions or queries that you may have. So let me stop here, and probably I think we have another 10-15 minutes. So I'll take any questions that we may have. Okay, so there are a few questions here. So let me read, because I'm not sure if you can see the questions from. The first question is, please, can we let me know whether we need digital marketing and traditional marketing or both, right? See, again, it depends on whom you're trying to target, isn't it? So if you're only targeting a specific segment and they are not that digitally savvy, then you do not need to market digitally, right? So just because everybody else in the market is doing digital marketing, it's not necessary that you should also be doing digital marketing. Okay? So let's go to the second question here. I do have customers in the segment of innovators and visionaries. If I have to now cross the chasm to target pragmatists, please advise on what can be the right segment. I guess this is a little bit of a generic question at this stage. I might need little more information. Maybe you can send me an email, Ishant, later. But generally, I think once you have the innovators, and the visionaries, right? So look at your market segments. So look at, as I was talking about, which industries I should be targeting, right? So you might have a lot of different industries you can target. Then you have to do some kind of a SWOT analysis and looking at, okay, what are the strengths and weaknesses? If I go to this segment, what's the remaining segments? And where do you have some kind of an advantage over other players in the marketplace? So you need to do some analysis, and then you can figure out which segment seems to be the most profitable, not just in the short run, but also in the long run. Okay? And the third question here is, does a finance or operations guy need marketing skills? Of course, if you're asking a marketing professor, I'll say yes, right? But jokes apart, I think these days everybody does need cross functional experience. So in fact, I would say the other way around. I think for a marketing person, it's very important to understand finance and operations. So gone are the days when you are actually can afford to be not maybe understand how the product is produced or what are the lead times of a product and so on, right? Because customers can find most of the information that a salesperson or marketing person is giving these days. So you have to up the game. So if you want to be a really good marketer or a salesperson, I would highly encourage you to take courses and familiarize yourself with both finance and operations. So the next question. So thank you for explaining all these categories of users and all. My question is, how would we differentiate those if talking about service-based business or not product-based business? Thank you, Ashveer, for the question. So even for a service-based business, right? So think about, let's say, online trading. So when the online trading came into effect, so it's more of a service of lesser than a product if you think of. And when you're launching that, again, you have the same set of segments, right? So somebody who is comfortable with the technology or who is actually highly, what do you call, excited about the technology. Oh, previously I had to go to a broker and the broker will basically will execute the deal. So instead now I can do it myself. So there is one segment which is going to do that. And the next segment might be thinking about, okay, so this is going to save time for me, or maybe I can do it myself at my own leisurely period. So that might be the next segment. But the mainstream segment might be little hesitant, right? So so from a marketing perspective, so when you're advertising for the first time, your idea of online trading, your emphasis has to be actually on the benefit of yourself be able to do the deals, isn't it? But as you move to the future segments, the emphasis should be on how easy it is or how well the customer support can help you. And maybe you should have a training program and say, okay, to learn this online trading is not that difficult. So the segment of the customers is going to change. And depending on that, your marketing communication element has to be different. Okay. So I hope you got the point that why the marketing has to be marketing communication elements, even the product. So the 4 P's of marketing: product, place, promotion. So all of these have to be different at each stage of the product life cycle. Okay. So let's go to the next one of the few questions. I'm running a startup for a unstructured parking sites for municipal corporations managed by contractors named so and so. It allows users to buy parking tickets or passes for the city. It's self-funded with no investment as of now. How to cross the chasm to target pragmatists? Ishant, I think this is an excellent question, but maybe we can speak offline for this. So please feel free to send me an email. We can set up some time and we can discuss this. Thank you for that. Okay, so what is one tip for marketing by companies with negligible budget? Okay, so when you have negligible budget, I think so. So my one tip would be that you spend actually more time analyzing, right? You spend more time on the blackboard trying to figure out what is the right segment to target, and how do I go about this? Because if you have negligible budget, so it is going to be really, really difficult for you to move forward if you make a costly mistake. So the word of mouth is going to be really important. So maybe you have to think about how do I generate word of mouth, right? So I think there is a parallel session or a session previously where I think somebody was talking about how do you generate viral content, right? Hopefully that gave you some tips on how can you generate viral content. So think about, maybe you should think in those, in that context. So the next one is how can the customer experience can be mentioned. I'm not sure whether it is mentioned or maybe I'm assuming it is measured. So there are different tools by which you can measure customer experience. You can do a survey, or you can actually bring in a few customers and organize a focus group and take their feedback. And there are other ways actually called as customer immersion experience, so where you go and spend time in customers, either in their offices or in their homes. Okay, so to understand what are the difficulties the customers face on a day-to-day basis, and understand how the customers are actually using your product. So there is one nice example that I've come across. So I think a few, not years, maybe a few decades back, so companies have started giving storage space under the refrigerators. Okay, because the houses in India are smaller, so people thought that the storage space might be useful for the customers, but it is actually mostly not used for the purpose it was intended for. And people were using maybe to store maybe potatoes and things like that, but not what the firms were actually trying to use. So many times just visiting a customer's house or a customer's factory will give you a lot of insights about what the customer is using the product for. So sometimes they might actually be more clever and more imaginative than you as a supplier. So they might find more and better uses than what you intended for. Okay, so it's always, I think, advisable to spend time with customers. So the next one is why door-to-door marketing is better than digital marketing. So of course, in door-to-door marketing, I'm guessing when you're saying better, the conversion rates might be higher, but of course the cost is also much higher. So the conversion rates are higher because you're spending a lot more time with the customer. You're able to get the attention from the customer, you're targeting in the right way. But in the digital era, the customers hardly have any time, and you're probably looking at the ad for only for a few minutes. So naturally, the conversion rates are way lower in the digital marketing. But I think the reach of digital marketing is way higher. There is no way you can reach, let's say, 1 lakh or a 5 lakh customers with door-to-door marketing. It has its own limitations. Marketing by huge companies. Marketing is done by huge companies with big budget. Is it justified? Yeah. So of course, right? So people, the companies who already have money, they will obviously use it. And remember, so this is also provides employment to many people, and there are a lot of people working in these marketing agencies. It creates an economy by itself. So there is nothing wrong for marketing companies to actually market their products. It makes life difficult for the smaller companies, but I think definitely the digital has made it way more easier. Think about, like, before Amazon, it is way more difficult for smaller firms to compete, right? So there is no distribution, there is no way you can even advertise your product. But if you have a good product these days, you can easily put it on Amazon, and whatever commission Amazon takes, let them take. But then the remaining, if you're doing a good job, organically and naturally, the ratings of your product will improve and people start to notice, right? So because even the Amazon algorithm will show the best products, or it recommends the best products. And so that actually, in some sense, it made the field, I think, it created a far more level playing field. Okay, I guess that's all the questions that I could see here on the screen. And as I mentioned, I'm very happy to talk to you in person. So please, you can find my email on the ISB website. Please send me an email and we can set up some time and talk in person if you have any specific questions related to your firm. Okay. And thank you very much. I hope this session